Hi everyone, and welcome to this video on CircleCI Webhooks. Recently, CircleCI released their webhook technology offering more integration with the platform. Now you can get information on events happening on the platform immediately because webhooks work with a push model of communication, unlike the API that you have to pull information by calling it to retrieve information. So what are we going to be doing in this video? In this video, we're going to be sending our CircleCI webhooks to an API that logs a subset of the webhook payload information. And we're going to be doing all this in our local development environment. So what are we going to need for this practice? The first thing we need is a locally running API, and I have one here. I have a Node.js API running here at port 1337. Let me pull up Visual Studio Code so that you can see the endpoints that we have on our API. We have the root endpoint, then we have the endpoint that logs the CircleCI webhook, which is named log CircleCI webhook, and we have another endpoint for viewing the webhooks that we've successfully logged, which is the fetch webhooks logs endpoint. So that's our API. The next thing we're going to need is the Hookdeck CLI, and I have that already installed. I'm going to be running it from this terminal. And also you would need a CircleCI project. I have a CircleCI project here where I deployed a React application to Netlify. You don't need to worry about that. You can simply use any project of your choice, but this is the one I'm going to be using. So this is the project we're going to be creating the webhook for and triggering webhooks by running our builds. When a build completes, CircleCI is going to send a webhook to the endpoint that we supplied when creating the webhook. So let's begin. The first thing we're going to do is to generate a webhook URL, and that is why we have the Hookdeck CLI, and that's what we're going to be doing right now. To generate a webhook URL, simply type Hookdeck listen. Then you provide the port. This is the port on which your API is running, which is 1337. So we say 1337 and hit enter. We're just going to wait for Hookdeck to start the interactive CLI process for creating the webhook. Because I'm not logged in, Hookdeck is going to create an automatic guest account. So that should be good enough for this demo. Now, the first prompt that comes up is, what should be your new source label? I'm just going to name that CircleCI. The next one says, what path should the webhooks be forwarded to? That would be our log CircleCI webhook endpoint. The next prompt says, what's your connection label? I'm just going to call that my CircleCI webhook logger. Since this API logs webhook information, I'm just going to give it this name, my CircleCI webhook logger. As you can see, Hookdeck has created our webhook URL. There's a webhook URL, and the CLI is ready to receive connections. So I'm just going to copy this webhook URL. And the next step, we're going to be creating our webhook on CircleCI. So here on the CircleCI dashboard with the project selected, to create a webhook, you click on project settings. Project settings is this button on the top right corner. So you click on project settings. This will take us to the project settings page. Here on the side menu, you see a webhooks link. So you click that. And on the webhooks page, we currently have no webhooks. If we have webhooks, we'll see them listed here. So I'm just going to click this add webhook button to add a new webhook. For the webhook name, you can provide any name, any descriptive name. Just make sure that it's unique. I'm going to call this my demo webhook. And for the receiver URL, we'll paste in our webhook URL. So CircleCI calls the webhook URL the receiver URL. So just paste in the webhook URL that you copied from the CLI. That's the one here. With that in place, the next optional field, these two fields are compulsory. That's the name and the webhook URL. That's the receiver URL. A secret token. This is important for authentication if you want to perform authentication on your endpoint. And we will be doing that in this video. So I'm just going to provide an API token. This API token will be used on our API to validate the payload that comes from CircleCI so that we can confirm that the webhook truly comes from CircleCI. I'm just going to keep a simple value here, ABCD 1, 2, 3. In a production setting, you want to use something that is stronger than this. Next, we have a certificate verification checkbox. If we check this, it's going to verify if our certificate is up to date and it's authentic. And for the events, you have to pick at least one event here to subscribe for. And I'm going to be going with the workflow completed. Job completed is going to send you a webhook each time a job is complete, and you can have multiple jobs in a workflow. Now I don't want to have to receive a webhook for each job in my workflow. So I'm just going to go with the workflow completed so that when the entire build completes, I get a webhook. So with all this in place, just click add webhook to register the webhook. That's good. You see your webhook here on the webhooks page, my demo webhook. Now let's go ahead and test our webhook. The first thing you want to make sure is that your CLI is currently connected. So here we see it says ready, but to confirm, I'm just going to copy this login URL, which is also required to log into a guest session. And I'm going to load it in my browser. And here you can see on the menu by the left here that the CLI is currently connected. So we're good to go. We can now test our webhook. To test the webhook, we need to trigger a build. So I'm going to go to my CircleCI project. Now you can simply just make a commit to the repository that is responsible for this project, and the build will run. But because I already have some builds that I've ran, I'm just going to click this rerun workflow from start button to just rerun the build. As you can see, the workflow is running, and once this workflow completes, you would have a webhook sent to the endpoint that we provided to CircleCI. Now that our build is complete, let's go to our CLI and check that we have an entry for the webhook that was just fired. And here we have it. We have an entry for the webhook on our CLI. First, we have the status code 201, which shows that a webhook was logged. Then we have the request method, which is post. CircleCI Webhooks use the post request to send the HTTP request for the webhook. And we have the endpoint that we provided to HookDeck to tunnel our webhook to, which is the log CircleCI Webhook endpoint. And after this pipe, we have the event page to view the details of our webhook. So I'm just going to copy that, go to the browser and load that up. So as you can see here in the browser, we have details of our webhook. We have the header section where you can see all the headers for the CircleCI webhook. And one interesting header here is the CircleCI signature webhook, which is the cryptographic version of the payload using the secret key to encrypt it. And we also have the body section where you can expand this root object to view the details in the CircleCI webhook. As you can see, you have details about the webhook in this webhook sub-object or nested object. We have the workflow nested object, we have the pipeline nested object. And you can see the status here, 201. If we click the status, you can see the server response message, which is webhook event successfully logged. So with this in place, we are receiving our webhook successfully or in our local environment, and it is hitting our endpoint. To confirm that our webhook is being logged, let us go to the fetch webhook logs endpoint. That will be localhost. My caps lock is on. Localhost fetch webhook logs. And you can see here we have our webhook successfully logged. This is a value that was in the database before, so you don't have to worry about this, but this is coming from our webhook, that is the one that we just fired. So as you can see, we're successfully receiving our webhooks, and as you can see here, CLI is currently disconnected. Let me refresh the page to see if that fixes that. Interesting. So to get the CLI back up, I'm just going to quit it here. Then I'm going to run HookDeck listen again. And you can see the CircleCI connection that we created is still there. So you just select that instead of creating a new one. And with that, we get our ready message once again. And you see the CLI is connected. It's once again connected. So this is what you do when you notice that your CLI is disconnected. You just restart your HookDeck listen command and you get your connection back. So now we're going to be looking at authentication. Right now, our authentication is not in effect, but we have it in code. So if you go to server.js, here on lines 10, 11, and 12, we have some values defined for the authentication header, the algorithm used, and the secret key. And as you can remember, this is the secret key. This was the secret key that we set in our CircleCI webhook form. But if we scroll down here, the function that implements the authentication is currently commented out. It's actually a middleware function that is used on all post requests, since CircleCI sends its webhook as post request. So I'm just going to wrap the text in this code editor and uncomment this line. uncomment this line. I'm just going to uncomment this line. And with that in place, our authentication check is in place. So I'm going to restart the Node.js server so that those changes kick in. So now our server is back up. And to check that our authentication works, we need to rerun the webhook. We need to trigger a new webhook. Now I could just go to my CircleCI dashboard and rerun this workflow again so that I can have a webhook. But the beauty of using the hook.dex CLI is that you get this retry button that you can just click and fire the webhook once again. So you can repeat the last webhook or the webhook responsible for this page. So I'm just going to do that so that we can run a test. I'm going to click retry. And you see event queued for retry. If you scroll down, you'll see in the attempt section that a webhook is currently loading. As you can see, we have a successful attempt and our success message returned by the server. But this might not confirm that our authentication actually works. So what I'm going to do is go to the code base and mess with the API key. Now instead of ABCD123, I'm just going to remove 3 and save that, so that we have an incorrect key. I'll go back to the server instance and shut it down, bring it back up. That's good. Then return to the events page and we try this once again. As you can see, another attempt is loading, and eventually we see that we get a 500 error. Now we get an error, and if we click on this error, you can see here on the message on the right hand side, it says request body digest. This value coming from CircleCI did not match, or rather this value computed from using the API key, the wrong API key, did not match the one in the CircleCI header, which is this value. So you see, our authentication actually works because when we mess with the API key, we get a wrong signature and the request or the webhook gets bounced. So that's it on getting started with CircleCI Webhooks. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like. And if you want to watch more videos on CircleCI Webhooks and webhooks in general, please subscribe to the channel so that you can get updated as soon as we drop new videos. Happy coding!